Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Composers at Home, maybe drinking coffee. I'm going to fade out our hold music. That was I'm Old Fashioned with my, as I usually do often. That was my father performing. Hope everybody's doing okay tonight. It is springtime, and my allergies are telling me very much that it is springtime because all these beautiful things are blooming, and my eyes are watering, and my head hurts, and all that kind of good stuff. But I hope that wherever you are in your spring universe, that your allergies, if you have them, aren't too bad. So here we are already at the end of April. And tonight I have yeah, very fortunate to have our guest, Nahre Sol, with me tonight. So I'm going to bring her on in just a moment, but I'm going to do the usual requisite stuff. That's my name, in case you ever forgot it, Elliot Miles McKinley. And I would be remiss if I didn't also do the social media stuff. So please like and subscribe, click the button and all that kind of stuff that one wants to do or one should do for social media. That very much helps. All the likes and comments and so on and so forth all feeds into various algorithms that actually help these videos and help the channel. So please, that would be really awesome. Even if you never watch another video, click like. That being said, I think I'm going to just get right to it and introduce tonight's guest, pianist and composer and YouTuber. Many of you probably who are watching have heard of her or have maybe watched some of her videos. She's fabulous on all of those fronts, and so I will waste no more time and bring in my guest, Nahre. So, Nahre, how are you doing tonight?
Hello. Great. Thank you. And how are you doing,
I'm
Elliot?
I'm doing okay. Besides the allergies, do you suffer from springtime allergies?
I do. I do. I just take some allergy meds,
Right. The
maybe a couple times a week.
right. But me and Claritin are, very tight.
Me too.
Right? That's
But it's nice that it's warming up. I
yes.
mean, I shouldn't say anything because I'm in California, but I just I appreciate warm weather.
Sure, sure. Well, you're no stranger to cold weather.
No,
You having lived in northern climes like New York and in Canada, Toronto, and so forth. So you know what it's like whenever spring sort of springs upon the Northeast, right? It's really
right.
actually quite a magical thing. So I will say this to those who are watching tonight. Please, even if you don't have any questions, please come in and say hello. Let us know that you're watching. I'm going to try to monitor the chat as best as I can. I don't have a producer. This is one of those things. Those of you who've watched the show more than once will know that I often make comments about the fact that I need a producer. But I am one person production team. So I'm monitoring the chat and pressing buttons and making sure that things like the audio and video is okay and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, say hello. We do have some hellos. Kerwin Young says greetings to everyone. Michael Hall, hello from Chicago. Bob Schultz, hey Bob. By the way, Nahre Bob is a terrific percussionist in Boston, Robert Schultz. So yeah, so I Nare and I were talking just a little bit, and this might be a good way to begin the conversation. We were talking a little bit in the preamble off camera about um, the last few years and how long I've known Nare, and so I actually got to know Nare through another YouTuber and friend producer, Rick Beato. And I had Rick on the show. I think it was in January actually, and he had you. Well, he played. your Prokofiev, an excerpt. You recorded the that sort of that famous C major
Right, right,
run,
right.
right?
That's how we met,
That
actually.
yeah, and so then I knew I subscribed to your channel and I started following and it was really at that time you were doing a lot of these practice
Yeah.
videos and like sort of technique videos and I also but also talking about the music, like the structure of the music and what was going on terms of harmonic progressions and so forth. And you often would mark up the scores very
Hmm.
nicely in your iPad. I think I don't know what software you're using. You would probably like Notepad or something with a
For score.
four score. And yeah, so you were marking up sections, and I always thought that was really cool. And I'd show those to students. Like in my music theory class, it'd be like, oh, if you want to check out, like, this is like a phrase ending, and then of course you'd play it, and that would be like really cool. Um,
Thanks, Elliot.
yeah. Well, no, that was my entry point, and I don't know how many of you watching watched Nari back in the very first year of her channel, but but you know whatever uh, however you may think about the production tech, your production values having gone up, which they have because you've learned. We all learn these things as we do it. Your content was fabulous, and so then I reached out to you uh, because I was putting together a concert of my father's music for as a part of an 80th birthday celebration, and and you said, "Oh yeah, that sounds like fun." And so I invited you to Boston. You came to Boston and you played a few of the preludes, which actually were as a world premiere. They were never played, and you picked several of them and played them in Jordan Hall. And from that point, you and I have been friends. We've been communicating and chatting and so on and so forth. Um, Oftentimes, you and Rick at that time were sort of saying, "You need to do a YouTube channel. You need to
That's
do
right.
this," right? There was an awful lot of that. So I'm kind of doing this, although this project is a bit of a COVID project that anyway, another story.
I
So
think you'll evolve this beautifully, just
thank
knowing
you.
you.
Right. Maybe I'll even have a producer.
I think it's awesome. Um, one thing that I do remember, you actually reached out to me to perhaps play one of your pieces first.
Oh, that's
Um,
right. I forgot all
and I
about
wasn't
that.
able to make it because of a schedule conflict.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and
That
that's how I first got to know you because you sent me your music
right,
score and everything, and I
right,
checked it out. I
right.
thought it was amazing.
Yeah,
And I remember being bummed not to be able to make that.
yeah. You're right about that. For some reason I had just forgotten about that part, but yeah, that's true. It was the percussion concerto for two pianos, percussion, saxophone quartet, and I was like, boy, it would really be great to have Nari, play one of the piano parts. And so, but you couldn't do it. You couldn't. It was in Knoxville, Tennessee. You had conflict. You had other
Right,
things
right,
going
right.
on. So then you're right. Then the piano preludes of my father's became the next thing. And
And that was during the time when I was more active as a pianist,
uh,
as a performer.
yeah, yeah, you were doing a more of that,
Yeah.
and and you didn't necessarily identify not as much as you do now, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a composer
I think you're
3 years
right.
ago. And so one of the things that I had mentioned off camera is that I have um, perhaps the an interesting vantage point in seeing a kind of an arc of your creative life over the last several years. And I've seen a
Right.
lot of things that you've done and a lot of changes and a lot of, places that you have explored and found new ways of expressing yourself.
Can you
And
elaborate on that? Because that to me is very interesting.
yeah, well, I mean, one thing, of course, is that you've I actually remember maybe it was almost 3 years ago talking to you and saying, you know what, you're really a composer. I said you should be doing more of that, right? Because you would do these
I
little sort
remember
of
you saying this.
studies and etudes, like you would fold these into your practice notes series, where you would say, okay, I'm working on, you'd be working on Prokofiev or something like this, and but you'd
Mhm.
say these little patterns, and then you'd have a little etude, a little study that you would play, usually exploring like a mode or something that was related to the repertoire that you were working with. And that
That's
would
right.
be a way of you learning perhaps the composer's intention by doing, which is actually how you really learn composition is actually by imitating.
Right.
And so I think that's what prompted me to say, you know what, these are really good. You should do more of that. And you're very humble, and you say, well, yeah, and but you've done more, and a lot of what you've done have been, at least initially, I think it was in 2019 when you started to doing like, something something as lens through a classical pianist,
Right, right. The
right?
genre studies.
Right, the genre studies, and you'd pick something, and I always like watching those because not only because you would do really interesting things with whatever the genre was that you were interested in exploring, and you know you would immerse yourself in that genre, steep yourself like a deep cup of tea, and then do something like, okay, this is what I've learned, and now I'm going to, you know, see if I can do it.
Right.
But also your locations were very interesting. Like, the back before COVID when you could travel, right? It'd be like,
Right.
well, I'm on the airplane, or I'm right outside of Cinnabon waiting for my flight,
Right.
or
Right.
I'm
Or like
in
a
the park.
library.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And I,
Always
I
different
always thought
spots.
it was really interesting that you would pick these interesting locations because I'm assuming that that a lot of that wasn't necessarily like you pre-planning weeks ahead, like I'm going to film in front of the
No.
Cinnabon. What it would be like is, okay, I've got 45 minutes, and let me just roll tape. And
Well, it was a little bit of both.
okay.
Sometimes it was definitely, I think more times than not, it was circumstantial.
Hmm.
So I'd be at an airport because I need to get somewhere, and that I know that this is the perfect time. I have an hour and a half. I can get something done, and that's why the location is at the airport.
Right.
There are other times when I'm just at home and I choose not pre-planned, weeks before, but maybe in the morning I say, okay, I'm going to do this at the park or
Hmm.
at the coffee shop, something like that.
Right.
And that just gives me a little bit of a destination, a soft destination,
To
because all of my projects related to YouTube, they're just self-directed
hmm.
and they can easily get mm, neglected and forgotten and postponed
Right.
because I
Kind of.
don't technically need to do them.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
no one's, I don't have a boss telling me, hey,
Right.
put that
You
out,
have a,
record that.
yeah, yeah.
So it's a little fun for me to think, okay, I'll choose a location and wherever I'm close to, whatever makes sense.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'll take my stuff and then go
And
there,
you would
turn on the camera.
and you would just make it happen, right? And then
And
you.
it was always a thrill to me because I never used speakers.
Hmm.
I always had headphones or earbuds.
Right.
So just to know that I'm recording this thing, but no one else knows
No one,
what exactly
people,
I'm doing.
and the funny thing is that some of those public locations, people would be walking behind you, and like they every now and then you'd have this
Right, right,
funny
like, what are
look,
you
like what's
doing?
going on over
Right,
there? Like what is that?
right.
Right.
I also had a lot more time back then.
Yeah. I so I want to I want to dive into that, into a lot of that, and
Hmm.
dive into your mm, your maybe your subject selection process. I mean, like what's that like for you in terms of like
Right.
thinking of ideas that are interesting. But before we go there, I think it might be interesting for the folks at home And just looking at the thing. Hi, David. Hi, John. Um, More people saying hello. Um, to get a little sense of like what happened prior to your YouTube years. And one thing I always ask composers, and yes, you are a composer, by the way, Nare. So you're, uh, let's just get that out of the way. So what I ask people is, what like how did you become a musician in the first place? Like what was that moment as a child or a teenager, wherever the case may be in your life, that might have lit that fire that said, you know what, this is something I have to do, or I need to do, or I want to do. And and like maybe some of your first memories of like where music was impactful to you, maybe even
Mhm.
before you knew that you wanted to be a musician.
Right. Well, okay. Um, what really started it all off was my parents buying a piano for for my brother and me as well. But
Mm-hmm.
for both of us, I don't have specific recollection of
Right.
what exactly happened. But
Uh-huh.
my mom um, reminds me that I apparently went to the keys and I was very excited about touching them and playing each note,
Mm-hmm.
remembering the pitch,
Mm-hmm.
and by ear I plotted out twinkle twinkle, things like
Mm-hmm.
that, and I just had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of fun. I don't really remember that, but I do remember having that piano around
Mm-hmm.
and just liking the sound of it. And my earliest memories of um, taking lessons and things like that was that I enjoyed playing the piano. Um, it was just an outlet for me because I
Mm-hmm.
was painfully shy. I still am very shy, and uh, am just an introvert, textbook introvert, I think. Um, but back then it was much, much
Much more so.
worse. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
even just being around anybody other than family,
Yeah.
I hardly talked.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think either my first years in elementary school, people actually thought, the teachers actually thought that I had a speech impediment because I didn't talk.
Because you were very
It
quiet.
was that
Yeah.
bad.
Right. Right.
So anyway,
Right.
I just felt that, well, wow, this is great. Um, I can, even if I'm not communicating to someone, I can just make sound, and
Right.
I like making that kind of noise, but not the verbal type of noise.
Right. Right.
Um, but I didn't really decide or know that I want to be a musician as a career until maybe slightly before college. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the age where, by circumstance and by society standards, people start asking you, "Hey, what are you going to major in? What are you going to go to
Right.
school for?"
Right. Right.
And with that conversation floating around, I started to put more of a focus on music because I knew that, very simply, it's just something that I prefer doing
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
throughout the day. I love
Mm-hmm.
it, and I
Mm-hmm.
can see myself doing it a lot.
Right.
Um, Not much thought into it. Other than that, there was no. Of course, as a kid, I had all kinds of aspirations, including I want to be a pianist, I want to be a doctor, I want to be
Right.
a vet, I want to be an art painter, I want to do this, that. So
Mm-hmm.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
it was definitely in there. Um, I went to a boarding art school for high school
Mm-hmm.
in Idlewild.
Mm-hmm.
um, that was very unique, and it enabled me to be surrounded by other musicians that were more serious about music and
Yeah.
focused, and um, it was just a very unique environment,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
as boarding school usually
Usually
is.
is. Right. Exactly.
And I think I was very influenced by just friends as well, striving to go to different colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And that was around the time where I felt pretty sure about music. And at every chapter in my life, though, even after I went to college,
Mm-hmm.
um, I always second guess this career and just thought,
Hmm.
maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe there's something else for me.
Yeah.
And I would be lying if I said that that thought is completely gone now, even now. So I think it's just part of the reality for me and maybe my personality.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, I mean there's something to that. Um I I think a lot of artists tend to question a lot of things. I mean, it's one of the things
Right.
that makes artists is the questioning and an artist that isn't filled with doubt on some level is, I don't want to say they're doing it wrong, but it's almost it's a normal thing, right, for artists to sort of doubt themselves or doubt what they're doing or this sort of thing. And so, um, to hear you say that is doesn't surprise me. Um, and I think uh, part of what makes your art work is that what you're doing often, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just my sort of observation from afar, is that in this process of exploring, that process of exploring is a process of interrogation. You're interrogating the subject and making sure that the answer keeps coming back to reinforce, yeah, 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 I'm doing it. Yeah, okay, I'm doing it right. Like this is cool. I still like it. I still really enjoy it. I still have things I wanted. So that you keep asking the question. And I think, we that's what we all kind of do is we keep asking that question, what am I doing? What are we doing? Uh
For sure. There's definitely an element of that, just being curious,
mhm.
um,
Mhm.
just turning over stones and just seeing what's on underneath. And
Yeah. Yeah.
um, a lot of it has to do with confirming something that you had an inkling about, or being open to discovering something completely new.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
regarding my comment about just the uncertainty about the career, I think it is that, and a lot of it's vague. I don't even know how to describe it. But the thing that always gets me um, a little confused is the times when I really recognize that I am what I really love, and part of me just lives for,
Mhm.
is being merged with a very fundamentally practical thing that we have to do in life, which is to make a living and and and
Yeah.
sustain ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that together, sometimes it's just it gets a little complicated in terms of which projects to choose,
Right.
why I'm doing certain things,
Right.
why I'm not doing certain things,
Right.
and especially during these modern times, even
Mhm.
pre-COVID,
Mhm.
it's just there are a lot of factors that go into it that makes me question a little bit.
Yeah.
Is this really what I am made out for? I guess.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, those are when I'm heady. I get heady.
Sure, sure,
You
sure.
know.
And you know, um that kind of thinking tends to it tends to get more amplified as you get a little older because
Right.
I can say that for being slightly ahead of you in the life curve that one does tend to ask these pertinent questions because there's only a finite number of trips you get on the
Right.
rock, you know, around. I just completed orbit number 52. So, which actually means I'm in my 53rd orbit, which means that I'm 52. So, there's always confusing because there's never year zero didn't exist, if you know what I mean.
I
Anyway,
love
that's
how
it.
you use the word orbit. I've never.
Well,
No, it's very characteristic of you.
but
Just
technically that's
knowing
what it
you
is,
and
right? I mean, you've
yeah.
completed one lap around the sun.
Right,
That's
right,
one
right.
year, right? So anyway, be that as it may, these are kinds of questions that I think a lot of people ask, not just artists, but I think a lot of people ask, um, and it kind of comes down to It comes down to, like you said, it comes down to a lot of it is about choices and what it is that you feel that you want to do and what it is that you feel you have left to do that you haven't done and all of this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And that's a moving target
Right.
because, it does, these things do change. And um, so having said that, before we get
Mhm.
up to our, like one of the things you did, actually, I suppose this probably would be a good segue, if you will, to ask you what prompted you to start doing YouTube videos.
Um, it was around the time after. So I just to give you a little more backstory,
Hmm.
or anyone who's watching, since you know this, um, I was studying classical piano performance, very seriously, and it was just a mixture of recognizing that maybe this isn't what I want to be doing,
Hmm.
um, so seriously, and also um, being burnt out as
Right,
well.
right.
All of these different things led me to just take a year off, which ended up being a little more than a year, but I
Hmm.
took a year off. And I was also just a struggling student. My friends that have known me since then, they know the types of living circumstances I've been
Hmm.
in as well.
Hmm.
Just the practical reality of trying to pay rent as a student, while
Yeah.
even if you get scholarship, you have to cover
Right,
costs of
right,
living, all that. That
right.
was really
It's.
tough. And I just felt like I was banging my head against a wall, with
Hmm.
auditions, competitions,
Right.
spending time learning this rep. And I just um I knew, I recognized I needed this time off for
Hmm.
myself, and
Hmm.
also to put it very straightforwardly, for finance, I needed a
Sure.
different job. So
Yeah.
I
Right.
actually, that was the year that I worked the most. I had all kinds of jobs. I was freelance, and then it settled out into mostly graphic design and photography.
Hmm.
And there still is, but that was around the time when the demand for photographers, especially in a busy city, was just so high.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I taught piano, but I was not very active in terms of playing or composing or anything like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And after a year of that, I got exhausted of that. And I just recognized, oh, this is inevitable. I cannot live without doing a lot of music and having music a big part of my life.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
came back to school. I was finishing up artist diploma.
Hmm.
And that was when I kind of started from scratch. I said, I'm going to reject all of my preconceived notions about how to practice, what to practice, why I'm practicing,
Hmm.
how composition and improvisation fit into the picture,
Hmm.
or not. And I started to draw from other sources. I went on YouTube a lot. I
Hmm.
watched many different channels to understand how other genres study theory or chords,
Hmm.
or how they improvise, all of this,
Hmm.
which was not covered at all, if not very minimally, in school
Right.
with my teachers.
Right.
And I just knew that this is kind of the wild, wild west for me, even
Hmm.
though as a musician, this is not very revolutionary. It's, just simply looking a little outside of your bubble.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I thought it'd be really cool to give myself structure, because a big part of what I was doing was self directed studies.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
um, it was a mixture of me knowing that by turning on a camera and documenting bits of this, I could
Hmm.
just have self reflection be a part of this whole process.
Yeah.
And also, being a millennial, um, capturing things on camera and posting it for your friends, that sort of thing,
Kind of a
was
normal.
really a normal thing. I wasn't
Hmm.
thinking twice about it,
Right.
especially with Instagram as well.
Hmm.
That was when, around the time, Instagram, Facebook. Um, and I love handling the camera. I just love dealing with pictures and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out how do I want to shoot this? How do I want to light this?
Mm-hmm.
I had fun with it. It was
Mm-hmm.
around the time when I think it was about a year after I got my dog, Bobby.
Oh yeah,
And
Bobby.
yeah, anyone that is a dog owner or brings a dog into your life knows that you just want to capture him all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
So I just always had a camera on me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I started making these little, maybe a good description of what I was doing is a practice vlog.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
would just record what I was doing. And if you look back at the earliest videos, it doesn't make any sense. I'm just playing little bits of this and that, spliced together with uh, pictures of shots of Bobby.
Right.
It was
Right.
really funny, and then it started to get a little more creative because I love also stop motion photography, and I had a period where I merged music, only 20 to 30 seconds, if not less, of music, and I would merge it with stop
Yeah.
motion, and I would use it as an intro. So at each little period, I came up with these little things,
Uh-huh.
these a phase, a
Yeah.
little project that
Yeah.
would kind of stick around for a bit, and then
Mm-hmm.
I would get tired of it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
how the videos evolved.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely didn't start by saying, I'm going
I'm
to
gonna do a
create a YouTube
channel. Right.
channel and
Right.
be a
It
YouTuber.
just became right. Right.
um, yeah.
I think a lot of people who become YouTubers, who become
Hmm.
well-known YouTubers, or grow their channel and become a, you know, dare I say, in some cases, a phenomena, is a lot. Most of those stories are not initiated like I'm going to become a YouTuber and have 1 million subscribers. It's I'm just start posting videos,
Right.
and then it just somehow catches on. There's a
Hmm.
combination of, obviously you have to have good content to to grab people's attention, but also it just, once the ball starts rolling, and assuming that the person who's doing the channel or doing the videos keeps doing them, that's the other key, is
Right.
keep
Right.
doing them, right? Then it becomes a thing, right? When you said the stop motion, you know what I just remembered? I remembered
Hmm.
salad music.
Yeah.
That was, I think, the first one I saw. The first one that I saw that was of your stop motion thing was salad music. Of you making a salad, or I
I
can remember
and,
what that was.
and that piece and that video was around the time when I started to open up a little more um, behind the scenes and also in front of camera,
Mm-hmm.
with pieces that I write and things that I improvise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I remember it was just an idea that I came up with the day of
Mm-hmm.
because um, I was staying at this place where the the kitchen table was quite beautiful to me, and the wooden bowls that were there were
Yeah.
beautiful,
Yeah.
and I just thought, uh, scrolling through Instagram, you always see these very beautiful food
Shots
shots.
of what? Yeah. Right.
Um, and I just felt like doing a take on that, but with music. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, I actually revisited that piece last year when I
Oh
was
yeah.
recording my album, and I extended it, and it sounds very different, but the core of it is still the
It's
same.
still salad
Um,
music. Yeah. Right.
it's still salad music, and I like that title as well. I've for many times I considered changing it because there was a period of time when I was performing, giving recitals, and I would either have it on the program somewhere
Uh huh.
or I would play it as an encore.
Uh huh.
Um, and this may sound weird, but in front of certain audiences, I felt a little uncomfortable saying this is a piece called Salad Music. It's
Right.
it's since stuck, but I don't know, for some reason back then I just thought
You just
maybe this needs a
It
proper
needs a
title.
different title because that
But
sounds
it just
whatever. Yeah.
stuck, and
Yeah.
I thought, why not?
Yeah. Right. Just leave
Think of
well enough
Satie's
alone.
titles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Um,
How do you title your pieces? Do you sit
oh
there and think
God,
about
how do I tell?
this is
Well, you
too
know,
complicated?
I have a yeah. Titles for me are actually a problem. And so
A
those
problem.
yeah, they're a problem, and I'll explain why. And those of you who are watching who are composers may or may not be on one side or the other of this. Um, but for me, um, it's very rare for me to have a title that makes a lot of like an evocative title
Hmm.
ahead of finishing a piece of music, and just I maybe I can count on one hand the number of
Hmm.
pieces that I've written where the title and the music kind of came together more or less in the same period of gestation and creation. Sometimes it takes me a while to think about what the thing should be called besides,
Hmm.
string quartet number 7 or something, as dull as that. Um, because part of it is that if I'm going to give a piece a title, I want the title to mean something to me, and not be so vague to someone else who doesn't know anything about what might have gone into the piece of music. The issue, and actually, your I think your consternation over salad music is testament to this. Is that different people will have different impressions of what that means or what you
Hmm.
mean by what it means,
Right.
because they're words, and words in a if you know a language, if assuming if it's English, for example, one is going to connect the dots and say, oh, this must be about this,
Hmm.
where you might be thinking it has nothing to do with that, or whatever the case may be. So how do you uh, you as in the royal you, consider those variables? And so I tend to stay away from it until I actually know that something makes sense title
Hmm.
wise. Um, and I also just don't, for me, I don't want to give a title to a piece of music just to give a title to a piece of music, or
Right.
give a title that's somehow going to be clever or ironic because it happens to be like a cool thing to do, like to have a
Right.
cool
Right. Right.
title, right?
Like a gimmicky
A
title.
gimmicky title. And,
Yeah.
I'm going to be completely honest and say that I've gone into like listening to pieces of music that have really cool titles, and um, been thinking to myself, the title is way better than the music, or something that,
Yeah.
what I mean? It's sort of like if you only put as much effort into the music as you did in your title, I'd rather have it just be called Untitled Number 4 or something like that.
Hmm.
And then so, so there's that. And I, 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 I actually, I think about titles more now than I ever did. In the past, I just said, who cares what it's called? People will just should just respond to it musically. It doesn't have to
Right.
be about anything, right? But I'm less that way because I think it helps people maybe parse the music that might be, uh, I don't want to say less approachable, but potentially more unfamiliar to a particular listener, right? At
I
least,
think so too.
yeah, yeah,
I think there's a lot of power behind a title,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's definitely it's just hard to find a good one.
It's true. It really is
Yeah.
hard to find good ones. So I'll give you one funny story,
Mm.
and then actually we should maybe I want to play some music too. Let people hear some of your music. Speaking of titles, um, so a funny story about titles is, a couple years ago I wrote this piece for viola, violin, and piano, viola trio basically, and actually the piece itself had a it. Uh, it fit part of a triptych of pieces that I was working on of trios, a triptych of trios. So the first is a piano trio, the Shadow Dancer, which I've shared with you at one time. Uh, and then there was the viola trio, and then there's a flute, cello, and piano trio that I wrote that hasn't been performed because COVID got in the way of the performance, and so it's being delayed till hopefully this coming year. Anyway, so these three trios kind of form a you know a, a a triptych of music that is somewhat related but not related. So the Shadow Dancer, then the second one, which I eventually called the Dream Angel, and then the third one is called the Memory Garden. And so those are the three pieces in the triptych, and they have a personal story for me, both a non-narrative and narrative personal story that's not important for the listener to know, but the titles are evocative and interesting, and they do say something about the music in some weird abstract way. But anyway, so I couldn't, but the Dream Angel, I didn't come up with that title until after I'd written the piece, and I wrote the piece and I sent it to my performers, and they took it to Alba. They actually premiered it in Italy, and this was 2019. And the working title that I had, because I put something on the score, uh, was a joke to the violist, who's a friend of mine. And violists are the butt of most musician jokes, right? So the title I couldn't think of anything, so I just typed in "Nobody cares about the viola."
Uh-uh.
So I sent it the score with the title on it to my performers, and of course, they texted back and they thought it was really funny, and one of them wants to
Uh,
framed it and put it up on the wall, and that's sort of thing. Anyway, it got transmitted as a placeholder in a Google Doc that I had sent over to Italy, and then later I changed it, but
uh-huh.
that got transmitted then down the line to another performance venue. So when it was premiered, it was the Dream Angel, and then we went on this run out. We went to this beautiful little town, and so if you come to Alba, which I hope you do, you'll get to experience all of this. And so this beautiful little town called Busca outside of Alba was they did this next concert, and so the title was printed, and it was printed "Nobody Cares About the Viola."
Oh my
And I was like,
gosh.
oh, okay. I guess nobody got that memo. So I thought, okay, hopefully, I can maybe have time to let people know that this is. And I told my friend Eric, I said, Eric, you should maybe announce that it's not called that. I mean, if anybody Italians might not know that, whatever. So anyway, as it turns out, the program got changed, and so there was a reordering of pieces on the program, and one piece that didn't get performed, so it got changed around. So my piece got moved to the end. So the presenter comes out, and he's also a composer. I know him. Um, but anyway, he comes out. I didn't really have a chance to talk to him at all because we just come in on a bus and whatever, blah blah blah. So he comes out, and we're sitting there right before the concert. He does the announcement, and he does, like, please turn off your cell phones in Italian and all that kind of stuff. And then he says, about a program change. I know enough about Italian, just a little bit to grab a hold of what he was saying. And I said, oh, good, he's doing the program change, and he's going to obviously correct the title mistake. And then he goes, basically he says at the end, nobody cares about the viola. So it stuck. And so, um, that's the funny thing about titles, right? Is like, be careful for for what you put on the score, the first time you do it. If it's untitled number four, or nobody cares about the viola, or whatever.
Wait, so it's stuck
Well, it's
even to
stuck on
today?
that
No,
performance. I
on
mean,
that
it
performance.
in the
Yeah,
print,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Right.
it's not stuck in the printed edition and the published
Right,
edition.
right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah, it's
right.
still, but that's my one of my most recent sort of titling snafus was that is I couldn't
That's
think of a
funny.
title
That's
until,
hilarious.
yeah, right. But anyway, nobody cares about the viola.
Careful what you put in your Google Doc.
Careful what you put in your Google Docs, because you never know
Yeah,
who's
you
going to see
never
them
know.
down the road, right? Yeah,
Sure.
exactly, exactly.
Or other than that, always double check the program before it's printed, or
That's
have the performers and people involved double check.
right,
But
right.
I guess
Well,
that
it's
depends
it's
on the
Italy, so
venue.
nobody
Yeah,
really, I
that's
I had
funny.
already had a few glasses of wine. I didn't honestly care. So, oh, Michael, pops in. So I think there's a similar reason why Boulez's piece is called Cumming is de Dicte. So I think it's a great title. Thanks, Michael. Michael Roth. He's a composer. and a frequent guest of the show. And he is out your way. He's in California, actually. He's out
Oh,
near San
nice.
Diego, and does a lot of work with theater and film music, and is a good friend
Okay,
with Randy Newman.
very
So
cool.
yes, Cummings is the dictator. Yes, I know that piece, and it is a great title, right? E. E. Cummings is the poet. So anyway, so um, is the poet. Yes, Michael. Yes. Um, anyway, any questions, comments for Nare? Please put them into the chat. I think let's play some music because you and
Sounds
I can
good.
probably just ramble and talk all night long, but maybe some music might be fun. Um, so I have what I did is I have your album queued up, and I also have some of your YouTube pieces queued up. So is there anything? Let's put it this way. Maybe might be nice to play at least like two pieces of music, and maybe something that shows either some contrast or some if to use a word that um, is sometimes misused, shows development or shows like your own in your own personal mind, like, oh, there's a piece that, and then here's a piece that sort of represents something after I've learned
Mm.
something or whatever.
Well, sticking with the album because I think that keeps things simple.
Uh-huh.
Um, one of the pieces on there called Anonymous Footsteps is actually a piece that was written way before the others. Because the rest of what's on there was basically written around or right before I recorded the whole thing. So they're all pretty recent. Anonymous Footsteps, I don't remember the exact date, but it was written when I was in Paris, which is 2013 to
Mm-hmm.
2014.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a good 7, 8 years ago. And I think that's just a good starting point, maybe.
Okay.
And that was right around the time I was just really fascinated with French composers, and um, I did not even change a note from when it was written, so it's an old piece.
It's like quite literally an old piece. You
Uh-huh.
said 7 or 8 years ago?
Yeah, 20, I believe 2013 or 2014 is when I wrote it.
Okay. Well, I am going to, since we don't have visuals on this, what I'm going to do, oops, I'm going to
Or you can go to, oh, okay.
put your cover of your album up. That'll be a good visual while we do this. Okay, so Anonymous Footsteps. We'll cue this up. Let me switch the view here. So now this is from Nare's album Alice in Wonderland, which was released just earlier this year. Or was it end of last year already?
September of last year, yeah.
September of last year. That's right. Okay, so here we go. And we'll meet back up when we're finished. That was beautiful. And I've heard that
Thank you.
before because uh, I've listened to your album. So um, I figured we'll do this view. This will be a different view for us, right? Uh, so we'll have your cover over here. So I'm doing this correctly. Uh, the wonders of a green screen. Um, so what I want to ask,
Sorry.
what's that?
If you're hearing snoring in the
I
background, that's my dog.
is that I, I can't hear it, but maybe people at
Yeah,
home
okay,
can. Yeah,
okay.
it's fine. It's totally fine. Um, so what how do you feel about this music today when you listen to it now?
Um, a couple of things. My first thought is that mm, I think I haven't there are elements of how I hear things and how I want to write things that has not changed at all,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
why I included that piece on the album,
Mm-hmm.
which was more of a current, at the time, project. You know, I wasn't meaning to collect older pieces. It was just I wanted to do something that represents where I am uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
last year, where I was last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing is that um, I think since then I've explored a little more uh, that is perhaps less stable in terms of form and less, mm, for lack of a better word, derivative of some other composers.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think back then I was very much influenced by the French idiom, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it's hard to pinpoint, and I
Mm-hmm.
it's something that's kind of rather hard to describe
Mm-hmm.
how much or why or when something is derivative. But
Sure.
um, I think I've just explored different realms of sound and texture
Mm-hmm.
and style since then.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, but the main thing is that I haven't really changed much. I think as we grow as either composers or performers, we're just heightening what who we are already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think I don't know. Beyond that,
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. When I hear this piece, and we'll play a next something that's a little bit more recent um, from the record, but when I hear this piece, um, I hear because I know enough of your music, I hear you in it. Um, yeah, sure. There's the French, there's that French suppleness that's in there, which kind of has that, but it's not. It doesn't sound like you're trying to copy Debussy or Ravel or anything like this. It's got some of the flavor of that French expressionistic vein, but it doesn't have, you know, it doesn't have, it doesn't sound like a copy. It sounds like you deeply really love that music, and that music is part of you. What I hear is um, your love of, and this is sounds um, it's going to sound really simple, but I don't know of another way to explain it without getting too technical. Is that your love of modal colors?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, and this is absolutely not at all a um, uh, meant to because if I say this, depending on who might be listening, it might sound like it's a knock, and it's not a knock. It's your love of staying kind of within these sort of shifting modal colors,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's like very much you. Um, and it's a little it's on one hand it's got that a little flavor of like the French impressionistic use of modal color, but it also has like some minimalist uh, uh, flavors as well.
Hmm.
Um, but there's also something inherently about you, and I think the you part comes in is in how you're phrasing. Your phrasing is very much um, personal,
Mm.
and that's where you that's where you separate from the rest of that is how you phrase, and your melodic phrase and your harmonic phrasing is very you. Um, and but again, I don't want to, I'm not trying to write a dissertation on your music.
No,
It's
to
just
me, this is always interesting. I think the part of the influence of doing videos and thinking critically about um, or questioning a lot of things related to my own opinion of things and how things are taught and um, talked about. It
mhm,
intrigues me because I do the same when we're as composers or musicians a little hesitant to use certain words. I mean, I caught myself there. I was a bit hesitant to use the word derivative because it's a loaded word.
it
It has a
is
lot of
right,
baggage.
right, right.
Also, in certain contexts, if you talk about modal writing,
Sure.
that evokes a certain kind of whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Fill in the blank.
right,
Um,
right.
I think that's quite interesting because at the end of the day, how we experience listening to music, whether it's something that we wrote or we're listening to uh, on streaming or in the car or at a
Mm,
concert,
mm-hmm.
um, it really just boils down to something that is very non-judgmental. It's just how we feel about it in the moment.
Yeah, yeah,
And I've struggled, and I still struggle with that today, uh, to separate that kind of complication that comes with language and analyzing
right,
and
right.
but at the same time there's a part of me that really appreciates it because that's the language that we have to describe it and so it's just
Right.
I'm just in very very fascinated
Yeah,
by that dynamic
yeah, yeah.
um
Yeah, you're right because
it's
language. I mean, for probably for a lot of the same reasons that titles are both
right.
useful and potentially dangerous, is
Right.
because it's language, right? And language can be, depending on the listener and the mindset of who the audience member is as the individual, can mean a lot of different things. Um,
Exactly, there's always an influence
right,
um and and some kind of color that's added by words and
right.
explanation. And you're right, circling back to the title,
Hmm.
seeing the title and internalizing the title is basically your first experience of the piece, unless you don't see it before listening
Right,
to it.
right, right. I sometimes do that. I sometimes do that as an experiment when I play music that I'm almost sure that my students have never heard before. I will sometimes play the piece without telling them what it's called,
Or who it's
um,
by.
who it's by. Yeah, well, they're less inclined to know who it's by, but I try to say, "What do you think this is called? What do you think the title
Uh-huh.
is?" Like, or what's the story or something. Like, I try to get them to think about it from non-musical um, from a non-musical point of view
Hmm.
first, and then have the reveal, have them discuss it, and then have the reveal. And I always find it really interesting as a fun experiment to do, and it's really fun to do with students who are not very well musically versed. In other words, that don't have the vocabulary to talk about music in the same way that, say, you and I could possibly talk about it. I mean, we could get really nerdy if we wanted to, but that's, again, not everybody has that vocabulary,
Right.
right? So I do find that interesting because I always I'm I'm actually really curious as to what people think a piece of music is,
Mm. Right. And also
separated from
the
myself, separated from my own
Mhm,
prejudice.
mhm, mhm. I think what was I about to say? Um, a backstory or just an explanation, context,
Mm-hmm.
um, surrounding a piece of music does a lot more to it than I previously gave it credit for.
Mm.
I think I held the idea that it doesn't matter who it's written by, what it's about, why it was written, what it's called. If you
Mm-hmm.
hear it, that's your experience of it. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I think the reality is a lot more complicated than
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on when you hear it, how much you know
Mm-hmm.
about the context of
Right.
it. Um, what do you feel about the title? What are you expecting based on who's playing it or
Yeah.
where it's being played? All of this, and it's endless. That
Yeah.
that all ties into your experience of it. And if you're a highly trained musician, you could probably separate that and look at it and dissect it, you know.
Right.
But in real life, that's not really how it's experienced.
No, no, not by the great majority of people
Right,
who might listen to the music, right? They don't experience, they're not going to say, "Oh, well, that E flat there, well, that was a little out of tune," and then
right,
okay,
right.
that's a
Hmm.
dominant seven chord on the,
Right, right.
like they're not going to do
Yeah, all
that,
of that.
you know.
Right, right.
Um, uh, and even trained musicians won't necessarily do that either. I mean, even
Right,
as
right. You can turn it
I'm,
off.
you turn it off.
Yeah,
You turn it on when you need to, and you turn it off
right.
when you need to as well.
Exactly.
Um, I want to play another piece, another piece, and maybe we'll continue this um, line of inquiry. But one thing I enjoy doing, among many things, is when I uh, present the music of Stravinsky to my students, um, whether it's in a music theory class or whether it's in like
Mhm.
a kind of like a listening in class. When I play the symphony in C, uh, I always tell the students what Stravinsky was going through when he was
Mm,
writing that piece of music. And if you listen to the symphony in C, I mean, otherwise, it's a there's a lot of well, sort of Stravinskian joviality of that neoclassical sort of style that there's dark moments, of course, but it's not. Um, he doesn't wear that close to his heart.
mhm,
It's out here somewhere. Um, but I then tell them, I said, well, by the way, when Stravinsky was writing this piece, he was fleeing Europe. It was 1939, early 1940. He wrote this in two kind of parts. The last two movements in the United States, the first two movements in Europe, as he was basically packing up a couple of suitcases, having to leave his well, not yet wife, but Vera, who would become his wife, behind. His ex-wife, who was the mother
mhm.
of his sons, had just died of, I think it was tuberculosis. His mother had just died. They both died like within 6 weeks of each
Wow.
other. And of course, Europe is descending into hell. It's the fall of 1939, and the Germans are advancing on Poland, and pretty, it's everything is looking, and of course the Soviet Union. He hasn't been back home
Mhm.
for, what, 40, 30 years, 35 years, whatever it was, since the last time he was home after the Russian Revolution. So like you paint this picture of like, how could Stravinsky write such uh, uplifting and music at a time that, the wheels were coming off, and he was coming to the United States with no guarantee that he was going to get accepted as a political refugee. Um, he got that 1 year gig as a Harvard, the Harvard Elliot Norton lecturer, but he had no employment after that. Like there was no guarantees. He didn't know how he was going to get Vera out of Europe. Like, I mean, you think about
Mm,
it, and so I'm tying into your when you were talking about like knowing a composer's or creators, in the case of improvisers, like Bill Evans, for example, or John Coltrane, or Charlie Parker, or any of the great jazz players, whose lives had you know, in some ways been very tumultuous, and yet they're
Hmm.
capable of creating this music that sort of transcends that. Um, but I think that the story of what's going on in a creator's life at the time that something is being created is interesting and can tell you a lot about the creation, both in terms of what might go into that creation, like
Right.
somebody like Shostakovich, who did actually wear his feelings on a sleeve,
Hmm.
you know, when it came to like writing about the terrors of the Soviet regime, or you know what was going on to his friends, or whatever the case may be, or somebody like Stravinsky who felt like the art was the object, you know, and that he was doing service to the object. So I don't know really where I'm going with that, but I just thought about this when you were talking about how it's interesting to it's really interesting to know kind of what's going on in terms of the context of the piece, right? The context of what's
Right,
happening
right, right,
around the artist.
right. Definitely. And I think sometimes there is something to say about it. Sometimes there isn't. There are pieces that I've written that I don't really remember what was going on in my head, why I
Mm-hmm.
wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I do remember very specifically. Um, for example, this. I mean, speaking of this one, I wrote it. I it's quite descriptive of what I was going through in Paris. I felt very anonymous. It was my first
Mm-hmm.
experience being abroad. I was
Mm-hmm.
very frightened by just the idea of being completely alone,
Yeah.
very far away from my family, and not being able to speak the language
Mm-hmm.
properly. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I didn't feel comfortable conversing in French until uh, you know 7 8 months later, and I that loneliness was very palpable, but also it was very peaceful. I really like um, being anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
and that feeling of it's kind of freeing, and
Mm-hmm.
there's something inviting about it, that the mystery of just being completely alone, and not knowing so much about your surroundings either.
Right. Right.
Um, so in that way, it was very just
Uh,
autobiographical.
yeah. 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 Right. Right. Um, but I think the music transcends even. I mean, it evokes that. I mean, given the story that you told,
Hmm.
it is evocative of that.
Hmm.
Um, but
But it
I
doesn't always. It doesn't, like with any piece. It doesn't need to live there.
Yeah, exactly, and it doesn't because it lives beyond its inception, right? It can mean many different things to many different people depending on where they are when they listen to it. Um, Speaking of which, uh, what should we play next?
Do you want to play Caged?
Yeah, the
Uh,
prepared piano piece.
it's prepared. It's. I really love prepared piano, and it's an on and off affair
Uh-huh.
because I go through periods where I'm just so into it,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever piano I'm playing on, if I have permission or if it's mine,
Mm-hmm.
I leave it prepared. For example, my piano, I left it prepared for the past 2 weeks as I was experimenting with some things,
Mm-hmm.
um, and 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 I don't de-prepare it, so I'm just living in this world.
Of
Yeah, and then
right,
I go through long periods where I'm I'm not really
kind of that into
into
it.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and when I was first introduced to it through John Cage's music,
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't think much of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also think it's because I first listened to John Cage's music in the context of school, where
Ah, right.
um, you're learning about different composers, um,
And you have a quiz on it on
in
Friday.
different, yeah, in different
Right.
in different labeling systems. You know, here we're
Right.
going to learn about this era and we're going to
Right.
learn about this technique,
Right.
and they're boxed in that way.
That's like find the composer in the pizza type of thing, right? Here's a little pepperoni over there, and there's some garlic over there,
Right,
right?
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But I've had fun with it. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to play that one.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's cue that up, and we'll meet back up when we finish the piece. That's a fun piece. Now I've got a whole bunch of questions about that piece.
Hmm.
One of them is so when you were, because you also did video on prepared piano, and
Hmm.
you know you talked about, you did your genre exploration of prepared piano universe sort of post having to take a quiz on John Cage on Friday type of thing, right, in school. And so in that, uh like, did you how deliberate were you in your choice of materials and the timbres, and then matching those to, like, say, your pitch content and all that kind of. I'm gonna get nerdy here for one second.
Hmm.
For hang on, because I also have other questions, but I'm just curious about, like, how, because you do have to prepare the instrument. I mean, this isn't,
Right,
you can't just like have a bucket of bolts and just start shoving them into random spots, and which you could do, actually. You could do that and just
right.
improvise, but
Well, since this piece, I've been using preparations that are completely original, but
mm-hmm.
this piece specifically is using John Cage's system for his sonatas and interludes.
Interludes, yeah,
Um, and speaking of titles, I'm being a little cheeky
of
with the title
course,
there.
yeah, yeah.
But it was my introduction to preparing a piano. I was working with a piano technician that I did a bunch of stuff with, and I
Mm-hmm.
trust very much, Damon Groves in Canada. And he helped me prepare the piano using John Cage's guidelines. The interesting thing about that is that it's different each time.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you have a reliable system like that, that's
Maps out
um,
the material, like map,
recorded.
yeah,
So
right.
yeah, so you can replicate it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always different. So if you listen to Cage's compositions, all the pianists that have recorded it always sounds slightly different, and it's
Mm-hmm.
because of the nature of the material and all of that.
Right.
That being said, when I am composing with that, I just basically treated it like a new instrument.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yes, I was cognizant of different pitch information. For example, there'd be certain notes where, because there's a rubber in there and also a bolt next to it or something like that, it creates a pitch that's not what you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I wasn't overly scientific about
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
identifying, okay, this is now a new pitch, and composing off of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The um the, I've only had very limited experience in playing around with prepared instruments. I do remember when I was a student at NEC, there were signs on all the pianos up on the third floor of NEC where all the big pianos where it says "Do not
Mhm.
prepare this piano," like because I think they eventually got sick of people sticking bolts into because
Yeah,
it's a piano technician's nightmare also. Uh, but um, but to me, playing around with that kind of thing it changes the whole nature of the instrument, like you just said, right?
right.
Um, and it becomes well, it becomes a percussion instrument. It becomes essentially it mimics like a sort of something like a gamelan of some kind, like with all the kind of different kinds of percussion sounds that you're getting
Definitely.
in bells and gong sounds and so forth. And it's a little bit like going into the kitchenware section of a store. Like I think about IKEA. Like when I go to IKEA, one of my favorite things to do besides have the meatballs
Uh-huh.
is to go downstairs after you've
Uh-huh.
done your loop, and to go down where all the bowls and glasses and cups are because that's where all the fun is. And I just start
Uh-huh.
grabbing, I start knocking on things, and I start
Uh-huh.
trying. Like I'm that guy who's in there hitting things, or I'm also the guy that you know how they have like the reindeers or the Santas like at Christmas time and they all sing
Uh,
like ho ho ho,
uh,
whatever. I'm the one that
uh,
pushes them all like and create cannons as I walk down the
uh.
road.
You're that
I'm
guy.
that guy. I'm sorry, but I find that incredibly amusing.
No shame in that.
No, I take no shame in that, and but anyway, but you know what it is?
IKEA. I'll have to try that at IKEA.
It's super
I went to
fun
Home Depot to get I go there regularly to find
to find
materials.
materials, right, to stick inside the piano. Um,
Yeah.
but it becomes that kind of like experimental lab of sound,
Hmm.
and so you or what I do is I think of the sound. I don't think of like that's a C sharp, right? I just think of the sound,
Right.
and then I think of where that sound should occur next, like as I'm improvising, right? So the same thing as
Hmm.
if you're playing percussion, right? Like if you're
Hmm.
playing glasses or whatever. So it kind of becomes that. Um, so when I hear this piece, and of course I know you've done other things, like I think of like a piece like this, and I think it's a just shy of 2 minutes, and just in that 2 minutes, I hear like a 30-minute piece.
Hmm.
Like I'm like
Wow.
there's 30 minutes right there in 2 minutes, um, and well I'm just like my brain is just immediately spinning to like okay
Hmm.
how to like because I can think about ways of like pulling it apart, pulling more out of that. And
Uh-huh.
now that leads me to a question about how you think. But by the way, uh, before I say that, before I go on and ask you sort of a nerd question, uh, the even a piece like Caged has your fingerprints on it because it has your phrasing.
Can you elaborate on this? This is very
It's the way that it's
fascinating.
your it you know what it is, it's okay without making it sound too simplistic.
You can be as simplistic or just
Yeah,
feel
I
free to
mean not
use
simple.
whatever
I don't
lingo.
because if I say something like again, I'm doing contortions over a language, um, but I don't want to make it sound like what you do is simple. So,
You can make it sound
but
however.
but what it is, it's your rhythmic patterns,
Uh-huh.
and when you shift your rhythmic patterns, it's very you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, like, in your improvisations and in your compositions, it very much has your fingerprints on it, which is a good thing. I mean, that is not, it's not predictable in the sense like I know what Nari is going to do next. It
Mm-hmm.
is, but when you make a change, it feels like, oh yeah, that's the change that, like, it's the saddest. It's like, oh yeah, of course, that makes total sense. Like it's the same thing of like when you're listening to, if you're listening to Brahms or you're listening to Stravinsky or whatever the case may be, you have the same kind of reactions. It's the same
Mm-hmm.
kind of reaction when I listen to your music. What it means is that in a piece like, even a piece like Anonymous Footsteps and Caged, the lineage there is in how you do your phrasing
Mm-hmm.
and your pacing of ideas. And that's where you are, is in
Mm.
that space. So, um, despite the
Very
fact that
interesting.
the sound worlds and the sort of maybe the intention of the music is quite a bit different, and of course the time there's some time separation, between the two of them and kind of where you are musically, but still it has your footprints. It has your anonymous footsteps.
Anonymous
Oh, right, there we
footprints.
go. It has your non-anonymous. It
Uh,
has your non-anonymous
non-anonymous
footsteps.
fingerprints.
Yeah, fingerprints, right. Um, so now the nerdy question, because I know kind of how you think about, or at least I
Mm.
have an intuitive sense for your musical phrasing, is how do you think about it? And now coming back to things like, say, piece lengths, or what you
Yeah,
when you think something should end, like
right.
how do you approach that? Because all of composers have different ideas about things along those lines, about
Mm.
musical drama, shapes, time, this sort of thing.
Um, I think a lot of my piece lengths are characteristic of several things. The the culture we live in, which is kind of snappier, I think.
Yes,
Just
quixotic. Yeah.
yeah, and it's a lot more distracted, and
Mm-hmm.
the nature of my personality, I get distracted very easily and my attention span is very short. And I think that reflects in the way that I approach
Mm.
form and composition. And on top of that, I don't. Maybe it's related to the things that we talked about earlier on, sort of this self perception or
Mm-hmm.
lack thereof as
Mm-hmm.
a composer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't really start and end a piece with a goal in mind,
Mm-hmm.
um, related to I'm going to make this kind of statement with this piece or have
Mm-hmm.
this be of a certain length, unless of course if it's commissioned and I have
Oh, yeah.
guidelines that tell me
Right.
make this 7 minutes,
Right.
or make this 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it's just a more intuitive process, but that being said, it is evolving.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm beginning to embrace and appreciate the beauty of longer form compositions, because there is time for things to develop. There is time for things to
Mm-hmm.
come back
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
evolve in different ways that it's not really possible in 2 minutes, two, three
Mm-hmm.
minutes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I wrote this piece, it was I had my ideas written out on a sheet of paper, but when and where I make shifts
Mm-hmm.
based on you know which sections I'm going to,
Yeah.
that was improvisational. It
Right.
was I recorded this um, I don't know, several takes, maybe half
Mm-hmm.
dozen takes, and
Mm-hmm.
each one was slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually a part of a larger set, which was I think 7 or 8 miniatures, um,
Mm-hmm.
that was supposed to be done using John Cage's preparation.
Yeah.
and they were supposed to be either played as a whole, before or after you play his sonatas and interludes,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're not playing the whole set, um, play them in between selections, that sort of
Okay.
thing. It's
Sure.
it's diverse,
Sure.
but it's meant to be sort of interlude esque,
Right.
um, and the way that I heard and conceptualized the phrases here and those sounds,
Mm-hmm.
um, was almost like capturing a moment,
Mm,
and it's
mm,
swaying from left to right and in different
yeah.
ways, but it's not really um, set out to go on a journey.
Yeah. Right.
So it's just like this capturing of uh, a three-dimensional picture of something where
Mm-hmm.
you can
Mm-hmm.
look at it
Mm-hmm.
in turn it around a little bit, but it's not
Yeah.
really going anywhere.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
how I would describe the process of thinking about form and lengths.
Mm-hmm. The piece itself is, and I'm gonna switch. I'll go back to kind of the main interview view here. There we are. Whoa.
Oh,
So fancy stinger.
fancy.
Um, uh, the piece doesn't feel. I should say this. Even though I said I can hear a longer piece, it was not necessarily that I thought that it was too short in and of itself. Because I approach it with,
No,
yeah,
I know
it
what you mean.
it tastes like a nice little chocolate. And it's just the right amount, when you have that little piece of chocolate or whatever, that with your espresso or whatever the case may be. Um, yeah, you don't. It's not like a big steak dinner, um, but uh, but I mean, that's another pot, like another, um, say maybe another life for it, or
Hmm.
for something like that, is that it becomes like a 35 or 40-minute piece. But
No,
but
I
also this this
totally.
this something tips the hat of like kind of how I, my problem, if you will, is that I
Uh-huh.
tend to write very long pieces of music,
Uh-huh.
and
Oh,
so I tend to be in that, like, the shortest piece of music that I've written in the last 10 years has been 17 minutes or 16 minutes.
really?
Yeah. Well, actually, well, with one exception, the short piano piece that I wrote back in June.
Hmm.
I wrote a little piano interlude that was only it was a commission, so it's 2 minutes, so it's 2 minutes long. But
Hmm.
um, so I always think in very long arcs. So it doesn't surprise me that I would listen to a piece like that and go, oh, that's I could do
Right,
40
right, right,
minutes with
right.
that, right? Um, I also think it's really interesting that you point out the aspect of today's, um, and without generalizing about today's listener, but the fact is, we have, this thing, this appliance
Hmm.
in our that's like, oh, and I have a love-hate relationship with this thing. I don't like you're in one earlier generation than me. I'm the generation that no one remembers. It's Gen X, and nobody remembers Gen X because it's either boomers or it's millennials, and we're like, hello, we were also here too, but we're also one of the smallest generations, so that totally makes sense. But anyway, um, so the love of this, of course, is what a great tool this thing is.
Right.
Like, if I want to know something, assuming I'm
Hmm.
connected to the internet, I can find it out. I can watch one of your videos. I can, oh, I don't know anything about, this battle that took place over there, in
Hmm. Hmm.
1774 or whatever. I can look stuff up, and I can find information. It may not be accurate information, as we all find out that what's on the internet isn't always true. But, you know, technically, there's a lot of human the the Library of Alexandria only wishes it had this much information in it.
Right.
But it has the side effect is I find myself, doing this, and it's like, by the way, it's a beautiful day out. Oh shit, yeah, right. Like, yeah, sometimes I have to remind my students, like, hello,
Right, right, right.
you know. So, and I get it. I get the intoxication with devices, and also with the immediacy of contact and the immediacy of transmission, and Instagram. And I by the way, I stop at Instagram. Like Twitter for me is like, I don't have any
Yeah,
use
I'm
or
rarely
need
on
for Twitter.
Twitter as well.
And
Um,
it has nothing to do with the political stuff. It's just that I just have no I don't have any I have no reason. I can't think of a use for Twitter. I just can't. Um, and then the other thing is Snapchat, which all my students use Snapchat, and
I don't use it.
that's their thing. And TikTok, I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm not gonna do TikTok, but you know,
Well,
but
I think, go ahead.
no, 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 no. I just said that's a thing, right? Is that people's this comes back to um the attention span issue, which isn't I don't want to say that the attention spans are necessarily impacted by technology, but there is some correlation to that.
Right, definitely. And I just noticed it ever since I was younger. Of course, I will. Um, I've gone through periods of time learning and performing and
Hmm.
um, working with many different types of long form pieces.
Yeah,
But I always just preferred shorter works.
yeah,
And I think there's a beauty in the miniature quality of
sure,
things.
sure.
And kind of goes against what I think in music society terms is rewarded and
Yeah, yeah, right,
um, glorified
right.
in terms of what a composer does. Think of
Yeah, right,
great
right.
symphonies and these grand
Well, this
pieces,
kind
piano
of
concerti and
right, right.
um, quartets and these massive pieces that go on. Think of
Ad
older
nauseum,
variations.
and
Uh-huh.
right, and
And
yeah. No, go ahead.
right, and I think if I set out to think more along the lines of I'm a composer, therefore I must write a symphony, or I
Well,
must write a grand piano sonata.
right. Where's
Um,
your right?
there's beauty to that, and
Yeah.
there's something grand and
Hmm.
um, just absolutely glorious about that. But for me, I write what I kind of
Hmm.
self-indulgently
Hmm.
what I prefer, and
Yeah.
I really like
The
miniatures and
small, right. Well,
yeah.
but you're not alone in that either.
Hmm.
I mean, one of the most famous miniaturists, if you will, would be Webern. I
Hmm.
mean, Webern's symphony is only 6 minutes long, I think. Not maybe not even, right? I mean, all those little, like, 7 bar pieces that he called sonatas. It's it where when and half of the music is rests. So, um, and I think that was a really great commentary on sort of the over hyper indulgence of the romantic European
Yeah.
romantic tradition of, you know, Wagner and Bruckner and where and Strauss. You had like just these ginormous
Hmm.
thing, like behemoths that sort of
Right.
stood there in your face. Um, and so, the way that I tend to think of it is that a piece is only as long as it needs to be.
Yeah,
And
that's a great way to put it.
yeah, I mean, uh,
And
my,
it also depends on where it lives. Like for
yeah,
example,
right.
you write mostly for performers that are going to perform it on stage in a
Well,
concert.
hopefully,
Well, yeah, I
right, but
mean,
that's
yeah,
yeah, I
right,
get it,
right.
right, right, right.
Um, and kind of how my compositional life and experience as a
Hmm.
composer developed, that really happened once I um even though I was writing, on my own, it really
Hmm.
started to happen more after I started to make videos.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just the nature of the types of work that I was offered, because a lot of times going back to what we talked about, um, we're dealing with projects and we choose what to do or not do.
Right.
And just where I'm positioned as a musician and as
Mm-hmm.
a just person,
Mm-hmm.
individual
Mm-hmm.
in 2021,
Right.
um, even a couple of years ago, um, I think invites a type of work that is contained in a format that is not the concert. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
the concert, of course,
Right.
but it's it is sometimes advantageous to keep it shorter. For example,
Sure.
for years, not years, 2 years ago, when I was working actively with previous sound
Mm-hmm.
fields, um, it was part of the task of each episode to work with my co-host to write a piece.
Mm-hmm.
And um, the guideline was make it a minute because we're putting it in a video.
Right. And it has to
Um,
fit within
so
whatever.
Eve,
Yeah.
exactly. And when I create my own videos as well, um, I keep in mind the length
Yeah. Right.
as best as I can. I mean, it's not always
It's not a
ingrained in
perfect
stone, but
science,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah, I'm mindful of it, but I think you're right. I think it just depends on what it is, where you are in life, and like you said, with choices. Um, and I think the most honest thing that a creator can do, um, I I this is one of my little mantras. I have several mantras that I deliver to my students. Well, one is context is everything.
Mm.
The other thing is spelling matters.
Nice, yes.
And that's just musical spelling as well as,
Uh-huh.
spelling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the third thing is that say what you need to say, and if you don't
Uh-huh.
have anything to say, don't say it.
Right.
Um, and that might sound sort of counter artistic, but the 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 idea is that the if you're putting something out there that you don't feel needs to be out there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an internal metric. It's not an external metric. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to write a piece of music to make my neighbor happy. No, that might
Mm-hmm.
be an
Mm-hmm.
internal metric for you to say I
Mm-hmm.
want to make my neighbor happy, but not externalized, right? So like where you're doing it not for your reasons, but you're doing it for other reasons. Like, well, I actually a lot of composers who are who do get commissions often say I really don't want to write this piece for trumpet and kazoo,
Mm-hmm.
but it pays $10,000, so I think I'll
Mm-hmm.
do it. So
Mm-hmm.
that does happen. But that being said, um,
We
that comes
shouldn't write something just for the sake of writing something,
well
or put something out there just for the sake of putting
just
something
to
out there.
do it because you feel like uh, um, that you're obliged to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a difference between needing to do something
Mm-hmm.
and there's a very fine and subtle line between that. Like for me, Um, I could go a long time without actually writing any music, but I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
ever stop calling myself a composer. And the reason why is because music is never far from my mind.
Right, right,
So
right.
I'm always writing. I'm just writing up
Mm-hmm.
here before I'm doing anything out there. And so I am, and different composers work differently. Your process is different than mine, and it's be different than anyone else. Is that for me? I do think a lot about the music that I write, and so I will take a lot of time off between pieces,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that isn't to say that I'm done writing. It's just it's a like always it's a continual process because I'm a composer whether I'm writing music or not, and so. But if I'm going to write something, for me, it has to be with great intention and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes like it seems ridiculous, but I will sweat over one note for days because I got to know whether that B or B, it has to be B or B flat. Like what needs to be there? What
Right.
really needs to be there? And that's the question. And I think you mentioned this earlier in a similar but maybe slightly different context where you said that um, something to the effect of, you know, the process of discovery is you're discovering something that's already there.
Hmm.
Like it's already built. The piece is already written. You just have to go find it. You just go shine the light on it and say, oh, here it
Right.
is. This is what it is. And you,
And actually, that process could be very frustrating. And I relate to what you just said about agonizing over one note.
mm-hmm,
Because a lot of
mm,
times when I'm composing, I don't feel like I'm creating something. I'm just trying to figure out if the pieces that I'm putting together are the right pieces of this piece that pretty much already exists.
yeah, right.
But I'm not. The process isn't very what do you call it? Fluid in the sense that I just sit there and I think, oh, it's already done, it's already made. So
And like
let me just do
you
that.
just have to
It,
to
it's
right
it's like
regurgitate. Yeah,
figuring out what's
yeah,
already there, but you're blind and it's really dark. And I work
right.
really slow
And
because
very
of that.
murky.
Right.
Right,
But I know that when I put my hands on it or my ears and I know that
right.
that's it, there's no question about it.
Yeah, it
And I'm sure, but it's this weird
right.
dance almost like I think I no I yes.
No, it's not that. It's this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talk about second guessing oneself. I do that all the time where I will not trust necessarily my first instinct and I will try every other possibility before coming back to that
Right,
and
right.
realizing, you know what? It
Confirming
really
it.
is that. It's the thing
Hmm.
I actually started with.
Right. But you
But
need to know
but you need to
that.
know it's you have to check it. It's what I also sometimes refer to as that gut check every
Right,
moment,
right,
right? Just
right.
like, so
I appreciate you saying that because I think um sometimes it's kind of hard to justify that amount of effort that's put into
mm,
even just one note. And
mhm,
um depending on the context of what you're writing music for or when or with
yeah.
whom,
Yeah.
um I think some people that have seen my intimate process and just having conversed with me have told me that I'm a bit precious about how I write things and
Yeah.
why and all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But I really think at the end of the day that that's what is important to me,
Right.
and it matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's okay.
No, absolutely. It's totally okay. You're on. If those are the, I mean, to me, hearing you talk and hearing you articulate that, to me is a process that I hear from not only myself, but I hear from everybody that's doing this on any kind of
Hmm.
level goes through that same process, and it can be frustrating because you can I can sweat over a detail that will go by in about 3/4 of a second of time.
Right. But it
But
matters.
it absolutely matters. The fact that I had to sweat over that
Yeah.
detail matters because
Hmm.
something about that is vital.
Right.
Again, it's that it needs to be there and I need to have the
Hmm.
right thing there. And so even if it goes by in 3/4 of a second and no one in the room in the performance might even not even notice
But
that
even if they
moment.
don't notice, everything that comes after
Sure,
depends on that
it's
because
a
you're experiencing it
right,
through time.
right,
Um,
right.
so yes, I mean I completely agree with you. I think
Right.
it matters.
We are right. Agreement here. Um, so if any, I don't want to keep Nari too long. We could talk for a long time. It's already
We definitely could.
9:15 or so, 16. Any last minute comments or questions, please feel free to type them in here. I see. Hey Chris, yo, two dope people in the conversation.
Nice.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So, So what's I think in our remaining few minutes,
Hmm.
what's in your um, what's in your mind now? What's in your musical headspace now, and what's next for Nare?
Well, a lot of things. I've had a very strange year, as did
Oh,
everyone.
everyone, we all been in this
Um,
strange place. Yeah.
right. And it's not only because of COVID, but just the circumstance of me relocating and also just reflecting on what I do, where I spend the most time on.
Mm-hmm.
It's shifted things around for me. And for the last almost 6 months or so, I've been learning about new things related to music, of course. But I've dipped my toe into different types of music making and composition that um, wasn't necessarily planned, and I wasn't really headed in this direction. But I've been having a lot of fun. I spent um, some time around the holidays working on uh, film music,
Mm-hmm.
and which was very,
Mm-hmm.
very an enlightening experience for me.
Yeah.
And then also, I've had an opportunity to concentrate on learning more about um, sequencing and using DAWs
Yep.
and producing music that way.
Yep.
And I've really spent a solid few months just focusing on that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's just I spoke about it in my recent YouTube
Video on
video, but
this. Yeah. Right.
it's just adding more tools in the
To the
toolbox.
composer's toolbox. Yeah.
Related to that, I also did something for a video game.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things, they will be known and public. I can talk about them more in the future, but
Mm-hmm.
for now, it's not publicly disclosed yet.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
it's just a very different way of working
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
different type of music. And
Yeah.
um, I think after that period, because I just kind of wrapped all that up, I've been really embracing just turning everything off, shutting all the technology off, and just
Mm-hmm.
going back to the
Kind of going back to it.
piano
Right.
and returning to my personal roots, which is a
Mm-hmm.
mixture of classical music and the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just been enjoying that,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been reflecting on just maybe moving on in the future, being a little more um, aware of how I divide up my time so that I do protect certain pockets of time in my week and my
Mm-hmm.
month
Mm-hmm.
um, to do what is not related to paying bills or building a career. It's
Right.
just for my own
Yeah.
musical well-being. And
Yeah.
I think I neglected some parts of that for a
Mm.
while,
Yeah.
just the nature of life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just because, let's say, a common argument that I have with myself is I'm learning, say that I want to learn a Bach partita,
Yeah.
and it takes a certain amount of time. I would sit there going back and forth and saying, yes, it's a great thing to learn that. But with that time, you should probably get to your other items on your agenda
Mm. Mm.
that are actually work. They pay the bills
Yeah.
or
Right. Right.
XYZ, whatever
Right.
reason there is behind it. Whereas, I don't have the reasons to learn said piece or any
R-
other piece
Right.
as I did
Right.
before. I'm
Right.
not
Right.
including it in a recital or I'm not
Right.
recording it
Right.
for something.
Right.
So I push those away further and further, but now I'm beginning to realize that no, they don't check certain boxes
Yeah.
in my life,
Yeah.
but is super important to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just that realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I've been just enjoying that. And it has no purpose. I'm not,
No, you know
you
what
know,
you know what it does? Well, I'm gonna I will I'll counter that And
Mm-hmm.
also, you've just given me a couple of questions, if you don't mind me asking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and again, everyone else, please feel free to ask a question. Chris said, "Cool session." He met you uh, through L.A. when she was in Minneapolis. Hope
Oh,
all is well. Okay, Chris is he's
how
finishing his
great.
PhD in composition at the U, and um, I've known Chris for several years. Very fine composer and saxophonist. Um, so, and Michael says play a video. Michael, I tell you what we're gonna
Wait,
do. We're gonna
wait.
pick
You
one.
can go on YouTube.
We're gonna pick one more as outro music. We'll pick one more of Nare's pieces from the album to sort of serenade us out, if you will. But okay, so I guess I'll go in reverse order. So you said like say learning a Bach partita, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, the value of that and because you're placing that entirely in the domain of kind of kind of a core word uh, connection to you as a musician, something that feeds you, but
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily, like you said, it's not paying the bills or whatever the case may be. However, the value in this is that any kind of endeavor that which I consider that to be a form of study, but that is a form of study. Like you are, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, you're learning uh,
Definitely.
in the process of doing, right? And that's like, for example, there's no value necessarily in me. Like I just recently did a transcription of a couple tunes off of the Bill Evans Tony Bennett record, which I think is a phenomenal record. You want to learn about harmony, that's just transcribe that record, you're good to go. I mean, it's like listening to Bill Evans's voicings and chord substitutions, but that's like, to me, that's where I want to be able to sit down and like just break that apart. Not because I'm a theory nerd, but because I'm a composer and I'm interested in
Mm-hmm.
cool sounds and I just want to know like I want to know how that stuff like what's going on there. Um and like my father who uh you know, wrote a lot of music. He never stopped playing, uh, even up to the day he died. So he had two pianos. One was his composing piano, and the other piano was his, practicing piano. And on the practicing piano, he had some Bach inventions opened up somewhere. He also had done a transcription of Tones for Joan's Bones by Chick Corea, and he had written it out, and he was, was was working on that. So like he was working on musical study for himself, right? I never forget. One day, and this was probably 20 years ago now. One day he was practicing and he was practicing Bach. And what he would do is he'd start playing Bach and then he'd start improvising because he couldn't help himself. And suddenly now he's improvising on all these themes and he's doing all this. Anyway, so he comes out of the into the kitchen and his fingers are doing this. And he's just shaking his head. It's all counterpoint, man. It's all counterpoint. And he just kept walking. So, and what he was doing, he was processing that
Uh-huh.
for himself, right? He was externalizing it. He was able to, so like that process of you sort of doing that is you know none of that pays the bills,
Of course, that
right?
yeah, right. It's
And
it's invaluable. It's
but
just
it's, yeah, absolutely right.
right.
Right. But like you said, it's tugging, like the other stuff is tugging at you because it's
Mhm.
like, well, I could be doing
Yeah,
X
I
when I'm
think
doing
I
Y.
think just the nature of what ends up being a part of your schedule is the things that are the most pressing, and
Yeah. Yeah.
even if it's not regarding,
Oh yeah.
paying the bills or stuff like that. If you're, let's say you're working with some people
Mm-hmm.
and there is more reasons, external reasons,
Mm-hmm.
stacked upon each other, those things will get addressed faster.
Yep.
So it's just that things that aren't pressing in for
Yes.
whatever reason,
That can kind of
they
go to
they
the
get just get
rear, right?
pushed away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Um,
I I have this problem all the time, especially during the school year, because for me, the pressing issue
right.
is, well, I have to grade and I have to make sure that I have something to
Hmm.
talk about. And
Hmm.
I um I am uh dare I say responsible enough as a teacher to actually really invest myself in my students knowing something and not
Right.
being the kind of teacher that just sort of walks into the classroom and just BS's, because I could kind of do that. I literally could kind of more or less BS my way through stuff that I know that I've taught a million times, but I'm always trying to like, can I teach it better? Can
Hmm.
I put a different example? I'm always doing that. And guess what? That's always at the front because it is my day job,
Right.
right? And so, the piece of music that I'm working on that might doesn't necessarily have a deadline for next week, that keeps getting pushed to the weekend, and then I'm tired and whatever. Like I can think of a million excuses, right?
Right.
And that's a battle that we all,
I think so.
are sort of fighting, right? It's sort of like when's the me
Definitely.
time,
Hmm.
right? Um, Speaking of which, I don't want to take too much of your time because I'm taking your probably some
No,
of
I
your me
should
time
go
away.
relatively soon, but
Yeah. I wanted to
don't feel
ask,
too
and
pressed.
maybe we could save a bigger discussion for some other time, but I
Uh-huh.
wanted to ask about how your thought process has been altered by your working with a DAW,
Mm.
and working in that environment, and also working in the medium of film and game
Hmm.
music, which I realize is probably like a huge. I'm just it's probably something you might not want to answer in like a minute or two's time, but
I'll try to be succinct,
uh-huh.
because I've thought about this recently as well. Several things. First thing is working with other people
Mm-hmm.
on creating something is something that I am familiar with in many contexts, but not so much specific to writing a piece of music.
Mm-hmm.
And um, there's a learning curve related to that. Just altering a lot of things that I am writing based on external feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the type of feedback you get from, let's say, a mentor or
Right.
someone of that nature,
Right.
because it's you're writing something to fit a criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And as frustrating as that was and has been, there is something that is intriguing to me about that, and it's there's an element that I would even say I like that. I like that you are trying, you're given criteria that
Yeah. Right.
that makes your focus very narrow and your options much
Mm-hmm.
narrower
Mm-hmm.
than
Mm-hmm.
if there were none.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another thing is about you asked about working with the DAW. It's quite early. I mean, I've experimented with
Right.
DAWs in the past, but never to this extent where, I'm really getting into it beyond basic, MIDI input and
Mm-hmm.
recording.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very powerful. I think it's very easy to go overboard with it.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
like Photoshop.
Kind of the temptation is, oh, I
Right,
have
right,
these
right.
plugins. Let me
You
push
can
that
just go
button. Yeah.
crazy,
Right.
and you
Right.
can it. There's no. It's this is both a pro and a con. Having
Right.
all of these virtual instruments and
Right.
sounds at your disposal. You can experiment with it, and you're not costing the time and the effort and the all of that
Mm-hmm.
related to someone who's going to come and play the instrument just
Right.
so that you can try out something.
Right.
But on the flip side, it can be a little messy because then it's you're not as intentional. It's like it's a phenomenon related to recording as well, digital recording. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
that you're recording onto tape, you have a limited supply. You know
Right.
that
It's
you
gonna,
have to
and
be, you
tape
have to
costs
be,
money. Yeah. Right.
efficient.
Right.
Same thing with cameras.
Right.
Um, think of uh, traditional film roll cameras versus
Yep.
digital, where it's just an SD card. Um, I think it's just natural for you to be a little more
Kind of
free.
free. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
free and um, casual. It almost to
Mm-hmm.
in the way that you write out something or try out something. So
Mm-hmm.
there are two sides to it. I think is to me it's just a pro and a con. I just
Yeah.
recognize it because I find myself like Photoshop. Just because I know certain things can be done, I'll
Mm-hmm.
do it and I'll just tack
Just
it on, or you
right.
know what I
It'll
mean?
just
It,
be
there's no
right because
cost.
there's there
Yeah.
right. There's no law. You're not
Mm-hmm.
losing
Mm-hmm.
anything necessarily in the like like you said, like tape or film or
Right,
whatever.
right,
Right. A
right.
tangible asset.
And because you're dealing with the confines of digital instruments and
Right.
how you're programming it in the moment,
Right.
you can come across, I find, a great idea that you may reject at the end of the day because you weren't able, or speaking for myself, I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't able to program it nicely. So
Yeah.
I therefore I think this idea is probably not going to work, and I just move
Yeah.
on. Whereas if I were to write this on manuscript paper for projected musicians, um, I would probably stick with that idea because I know that the musicians will help me make this work.
Right. Because there's that
And
iterative
I have that vision
process.
for
Right.
them.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
Right.
so it's it's just a mixed bag, but
Sure.
it's been less than half a year since I've
Sure.
really paid attention to
Well,
this, so we'll
yeah.
see how I feel about it.
Well, I always I'm dreaming up a sort of subsequent series of for shows, which is going to be focusing on like one piece by a
Hmm.
particular artist or whatever. So like I may invite you back and we might continue this conversation,
We
especially after you've had
definitely
more
should.
experience. So so this will be we'll this will be chapter one as I ended,
Thank you,
and
Elliot,
we'll
for
do
having
chapter
me.
two. Yes, thank you so much, Nari. This was really
And it's great
terrific.
to reconnect and catch up.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much. If anybody is watching um, the recording of this and would like to ask a question or whatever, feel free to put it in the comments, and I will forward it to Nari. So, Nari,
I'll
thank
just come
you.
by and I will
Yeah, come by and
have a
answer
look at it.
if you have
Definitely.
it right. Anyway, Nari, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. All right, we'll switch to me at the end. There's my little stinger there. So that was great. I hope everybody enjoyed the last couple hours of conversation and some music. We're going to do an outro from Nare's album Alice in Wonderland. I think since we mentioned salad music, I didn't get a chance to ask Nare about what piece she wanted me to play, but I think I'll play salad music as the outro. Um, and so for the next show of Composers at Home, Maybe Drinking Coffee, which will take place in May, on May 17th, is going to be David Froome, composer and very fine composer and music educator. So I hope you will join us for that. And we go back to me. These stingers sometimes take longer than I expect. Also, I would be remiss also if you didn't click the like or subscribe and do all that kind of stuff. As the ubiquitous social media universe that we live in. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Please, I know we're almost out of the woods with COVID, but please stay safe, practice responsible social distancing, and until next time, thank you very, very much.